Welcome to Meet the Leader, the podcast where top leaders share how they're tackling the world's biggest challenges. In today's episode, we talk to a female rocket scientist and science influencer, all about how to chart your own course and be your own role model. Subscribe to Meet the Leader on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And don't forget to rate and review us. I'm Linda Lucina from the World Economic Forum, and this is Meet the Leader.
I was young and a woman in that meeting, so I was immediately dismissed as the person that's going to take notes and not the person that's going to present to the rocket. So I got up and I was like, I don't care, Mish, you have to brush it off and focus on what you need to do, which is showcase the design of this rocket.
As a little girl, Mishaal Ashemimry looked up at the stars and was immediately obsessed. Her passion for the stars and for space was one that grew over time and also one that stood out. Women are chronically underrepresented in tech and engineering, and they make up just 13% of aerospace globally. And in Saudi Arabia, where Mishaal was looking up at that night sky, there were no women studying in the field and no formal space agency. So Mishaal charted her own path. Since aerospace wasn't available in Saudi Arabia at the time, she did much of her schooling in the U.S. away from her mom from 9th grade all the way through graduate school. She'd go on to become the first female aerospace engineer in her region, in the 6 Middle Eastern countries that make up the Gulf Cooperation Council. She founded her own rocket startup at 26. Today, she helms the Center for Space Futures, where she guides strategic investments and advances the space economy through policy and innovation. But she's also an active science influencer on YouTube and social media, making science fun for an Arabic-speaking audience, all while driving awareness of STEM jobs. Mishaal needed to be her own role model most of her life, something that might be more and more common as tech changes more and more quickly and paths become unclear. She talked to me at our Global Technology Retreat in San Francisco about how she created her own opportunities and how she learned how to navigate rooms where she was doubted, ignored, or even underestimated. She will get into all of that and what's needed to get more people, especially women, into aerospace. But first, she'll talk more about that rocket startup and how it shaped her.
When I was 26, I started Mishaal Aerospace, which is a rocket company, specifically targeting small satellites to put them into low Earth orbit. Because at the time, satellites are miniaturizing and becoming smaller and smaller, but they didn't have a dedicated rocket to take them up there. They had to launch as secondary or tertiary payloads on bigger rockets. So therefore, sometimes they have to wait many years before they get manifested or wait for the primary payload to be launched to be able to do so. So that's why I targeted that market. The vision for the company was also to go to the moon and bring back samples to Earth to facilitate the growth of the nuclear fusion by providing them the helium-3 that they would require to be able to do that. So that was my vision for Mishaal Aerospace. And when we started, I had an investor fully vested in the business, and then obviously things don't go as we planned. So we demonstrated a rocket and the design, and we did a static test fire of the rocket that we developed, and it worked. Unfortunately, at the time, the appetite for investment in aerospace was very limited. The understanding of aerospace was very limited. So then I had to put the company on hold, even though we had a milestone of demonstrating the rocket.
And founders of all types hit walls, and you're able to push through, even though maybe the end goal isn't what you may have imagined. What did you do then? How did you sort of take these learnings forward?
So the way I categorize the walls that you're mentioning, or the obstacles that I faced while I had the company, was basically two. One is technical, which I welcome with open arms, because my motto was test early and test often. That way you can figure out where the problem lies before you put the full system together. And then number two is financial issues, which I do not like, because it's very hard to convince investors, especially at that time where there is a low appetite for risk and long-term type investment. And a lot of them, they don't fully understand aerospace, so they shy away from it. And if they do, they already invested in some of the companies that were in a similar business. And so those are the two types of problems I faced. With the technical ones, I welcome them with open arms because you learn from the mistakes that you make from an engineering perspective. You modify. Let's say something failed, which it has, then you look at why it failed and then you improve it on the second take. And so it's a learning experience and it's manageable. The financial aspect, a little bit more complicated because you're not in control. You can convince as much as you want, but if they don't want to take the risk, they're not going to take the risk. If they don't understand your technology, they're not going to invest. And so it becomes quite difficult. Now, today, the market is totally different. There's a higher appetite for risk. There's a significant growth in interest in space, even from venture capital and so forth. And so they want to see things move forward. So the appetite is totally different today than back then.
What did that teach you about market timing?
The funny part is we were dead on when it comes to the market and why we started the business, but we were, in my opinion, ahead of our time in terms of investor appetite. And so sometimes you may have a great idea and it's great and it still is great and you're right on the mark, but it might not be the right time to have that business yet. I guess it's a learning opportunity. If you do start early, you're going to get hit with a wall and then see whether you can manage to bring it back up again at a later time, or you basically pivot to something else.
You were the first female aerospace engineer in the GCC. Tell us a little bit about that and sort of what has changed since for women looking to pursue this field.
So that title came by coincidence. It's not like I was 6 and decided, oh my God, I have to be the first aerospace engineer. No, when I was 6 years old, I was inspired by the stars. My mom took me to the desert in Aneza. While I was born in the US, my family is from Saudi Arabia. And so when I was in Saudi, my mom took me to the desert when I was 6, looked up to the sky, and I was mesmerized. And so I had a calling. I felt like the stars were like, hey, we're up here, get curious. And so my decision back then was, I love the stars. No one is giving me the proper answer of what they are, why they're there, and so forth. So the only way to understand them is to go to space. And the only way to go to space is to make rockets. And that's how I decided to start my journey to become an aerospace engineer. Obviously, back then, I didn't know it was aerospace engineering. I just knew that I needed to make rockets to go to space. And I pursued that. So I had really direct goal in life. I pursued it. And then as I graduated with aerospace engineering, worked in the industry, I discovered that, hey, I am actually the first aerospace engineer that's a female in the GCC. And then I was like, holy moly, this comes with a huge responsibility. And if I'm the first, this is not a good sign. We need to have more people because I cannot be the only one. This makes absolutely no sense for the future. So then I took it upon myself to make sure that I rise to this responsibility and ensure that I disseminate as much knowledge that I acquire globally and specifically in the GCC. So I have a lot of YouTube and so forth that I try to encourage people to do STEM and to showcase how space is really exciting because we need many people to come into this field. And I should not be the first. There should be many to come.
In the region, has there been maybe a shift in opportunities being made available or sort of pipelines of things? What's changed for women going into aerospace since you started your career?
So when I started my career and decided that I wanted to pursue aerospace engineering, a lot of people were like, oh, you're crazy. Why would you do aerospace engineering? Saudi doesn't have aerospace engineering. And I'm like, okay, but I like aerospace. And I was fortunate enough to be born and raised in the US that I can actually work here in the field and so forth. So I had the experience. And then slowly, and I've always advocated that aerospace is the way of the future. And so I encourage Saudi to have aerospace as part of the agenda. Any interview I had, I always mentioned that. And in 2018, Saudi started the Saudi Space Commission. So that was a great sign that they're moving in that direction. And although Saudi is not new to space because they did launch someone in 1985, His Royal Highness Prince Sultan bin Salman, but there hasn't been a lot of traction since 1985. And so, there's an appetite for it, but then let's push it forward. And then in 2018, they started the space agency. And so now there is a more focus on space. Also, I've noticed that there's an increasing amount of women as well as men entering into the aerospace engineering field and studying that in school. These are great signs that we're moving in the right direction, because even, let's say, if you don't want to work in aerospace, but you do have an aerospace engineering degree, it helps open doors to manufacturing and other elements and creativity in engineering, because you have a skill set and you have the fundamentals necessary to do so. But luckily now that this sector is essentially, it has started and it's growing and it's going to continue to grow, and then we'll see what happens in the future. But it has changed tremendously from having practically no space industry to trying to push to get into the space industry.
And unfortunately, like a lot of tech fields, women are still a smaller proportion. So women are 13% of aerospace worldwide. What 2 or 3 things in your mind are contributing to this?
That's a great, complicated question. So part of my other role as Vice President for Diversity Initiatives at the International Astronautical Federation is to change that. And so we created essentially a committee that promotes diversity and 3Gs. But aside from that, I think one of the elements that I've seen with my own eyes is the field is male dominated. Before we even get to the field, let's go in education. So when we started, when I was in college, we had a lot more women, but then as you go from year to year, the number starts shrinking. And then when you graduate, you see a lot of the women left and decided to go somewhere else, and some of us continue. And then when I was doing my master's, in most classes, I was basically the only woman in class. So that's one issue. So either there's a distrust in continuing that field, a lack of interest in that field, and 4, I think, is intimidation, that it's very male-dominated, that some people tend to go. The second thing, now we go into the workplace. You get into the workplace, being an aerospace engineer and being a woman, it's very high demand. So I found myself having to work 4 times as hard as a man in order to be recognized or to be given the opportunity or to be considered seriously. And the other element is you start to have to develop very thick skin when you enter these meetings. Because I recall when I entered one of the design reviews, the room was full of men. And I was young and a woman in that meeting. So I was immediately dismissed as the person that's going to take notes and not the person that's going to present the rocket. And obviously that has an emotional aspect to what you're trying to do. You have this imposter syndrome. Am I an imposter? What's going on? So you get up. In my case, I got up and I was like, I don't care, Mish, you have to brush it off and focus on what you need to do, which is showcase the design of this rocket. So I did. When I got up, the full room that was full of men, they were like shocked. This little kid is going to be talking about the design, which, I have thick skin, I can handle it, but a lot of people don't. And so should we have an environment like this for women? I can do it 1 day, 2 days, but every single day I have to do this. I have to walk in with this thick shell, trying to focus and trying to convince people that I know what I'm talking about. It's very detrimental emotionally. Third thing that you notice is some people, when they have a difficulty balancing the high stress and demand of an aerospace engineering job and then raising a family. As a result, some of them end up leaving because they're like, well, I gotta start a family. I need to worry about my child. And there isn't an ecosystem that supports family life in aerospace. At least when I was there, I didn't see it. And so they end up leaving. And then it's very difficult for you to come back because being away for a year, 2 years, your skill set starts to diminish. And so the chances of you coming back is low. So if you go through the educational hurdle and you actually come through and you become an aerospace engineer, then the second hurdle is I go in the workplace and can I balance that? Can I deal with this constant, I have to have thick skin stuff? Can I support the balance of family life and so forth? And then eventually you lose people there. That's mainly one of, I think, the contributors. So it's entry and then it's retention. Those are the 2 issues that we're facing.
You didn't have a female aerospace engineer role model. A lot of people in pioneering industries will never have a role model because they're pioneers, right? How can anyone be their own role model? How can they better seek out what they need to move forward? What would you advise them to do?
I think one, which may sound like a cliche, is you have to believe in yourself and believe that you are able to do it. You are not an imposter. You have the knowledge necessary, but you need to make sure that that knowledge grows continuously. You can't stop at university level and be like, okay, I know everything. No, because things change and things evolve, and you need to be aware of how things are changing and incorporating that knowledge so that you can actually grow from it. So continuous learning is a critical element. Believing in yourself is a critical element. Having the resilience to fall and get back up and try again. Number 3, a lot of people are afraid to fail. And my most important advice, and the thing that I always try to remind myself, is that failure is the seed from which success grows. If you fail, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It means you need to get back up, learn from that failure, and continue. With that learning, you will acquire a skill set in order for you to not fall into that pit again, because you've learned. And so you improve. And if you fail again, no problem. Learn from that. You have every opportunity you have when you fail is a data point. And that data point can be implemented into your knowledge base, and therefore you will succeed. And the more you fail, the more you're going to get closer to succeeding. I'm not saying just fail for the sake of failing, but obviously do it in a way that you can learn and move on. But don't dwell on that failure, because we will all fail. There's not a single human being that hasn't failed. So don't be afraid of it. Welcome it with open arms, learn from it, and move on. So those are the critical 3 lessons that I can provide in order to move forward in life.
And I have one last question for you, Mishaal. What's a piece of advice that you're grateful for?
That's a tough one. One piece of advice that I got was, sometimes when you have a difficult decision to make, sleep on it. Don't feel obligated to respond immediately. Sleep on it, think about it, and then make the decision. And I think that when we have a decision point to make, like we feel like, oh, we need to make it now. That's not the case. So take your time, study it, be logical. Emotion is important, but also be logical in some of the decision making that you make.
That was Mishaal Ashemimry. To learn more about space, and in particular the space economy, check out our report, Space, the $1.8 trillion opportunity for global economic growth. We'll make sure to have a link in our show notes. And to listen to more podcasts, including my colleagues' podcast, Radio Davos, go to wef.ch/podcasts. This episode of Meet the Leader was produced and presented by me, Jerry Johansson and Taz Kelleher as editor, Edward Bailey as studio engineer in San Francisco, and Gareth Nolan driving studio production. That's it for now. I'm Linda Lucina with the World Economic Forum. Have a great day.